What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and today we're going to be continuing on with the series for the Dynamic Parkour Trace System full setup. And we're going to be looking at setting up the modifications today, so let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so I have here the project that we set up the vaulting and the mantling in the last video. And like I said, today we're going to be focusing on setting up the modifiers. Now, the list of modifiers that we're going to be messing with and setting up are going to be the sprint modifier, the slide modifier, as well as setting up the use jump input option. Now, essentially what these do is the use jump input option allows you to use your jump input event. It will dynamically select between jumping or a traversal action based off of what it happens with the overall system selection. So if there's no action that can be taken, a jump will be taken instead. If an action can be taken, a traversal action will be taken. However, with the sprint and slide modifiers, these will actually modify the action that gets taken at the end when it actually chooses something. So this is a way you can dynamically select actions based off of certain inputs and create some really cool kind of movement events based off of what's being pressed at the time. Now, I know that can all sound overly complicated. I promise you it's not. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the use jump input option because that's probably the easiest thing to start with. So we're going to open up our character blueprint. For me, that's going to be third person, blueprints, BP third person character. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our event here that's actually triggering the execute trace that we set up in the first video. And we're going to take this and we're going to just kind of remove that out. And we're going to move this over to our jump input. Now, I'm actually going to move the jump input off to the side a little bit, give me a little bit more room, and move it down a little bit. This way I can put this here. Now, we're going to take the jump and remove it off completely. And then we're going to take all of this, the same execution, the same stuff that we set up in the first video. We're just kind of, instead of having it being off of E, we're going to have it go off of started of the jump input. Now, you only need to do started if you're using the default enhanced input jump because it does trigger more than once if you put it off of triggered. However, if your jump input is a single fire event, you can go ahead and put it off of triggered as well. It's just that you want to make sure that it doesn't call to the trace event multiple times, as it will then cause some issues with the way that the action is going to be selected. So now that we have our trace event going off our jump, the next thing we need to do is go into the parkour system in the components tab here. And we're going to go up to the details panel here. And in the action modification settings here, you're going to see use jump input. And we can just check this box. So now if we compile and save, and we minimize and just hit play. If I press the space bar, you can see that our character jumps, even though we did move the jump event from our character. But if I go up to one of these objects here and press the space bar, you can see he does a vault, does another vault, does a mantle, and then does the roll vault. So all of the actions are being taken now because there's a defined object in front of us and we have allowed the action. So now that we have the jump modification put in, now we're going to go and add in the sprint modifier. Now, essentially what it does is it allows us to be able to dynamically select between a few different actions depending on if the sprinting boolean that's in the system is true or false. And just a quick look at what those actions would be is if we look at the defaulted actions if false under the sprint modifier under action modification settings and expand this menu, you're going to see medium height platform. We can do a long distance vault or we can do a mantle. We can do a low height platform jump over or jump onto. We can do a drop to falling or a flourish jump to ledge or a flourish jump off ledge, which is soon going to be named jump off ledge to falling, just so you know when you see this. So there's a lot of different actions that can be taken dynamically based off of just a simple true or false statement of that Boolean value. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the use sprint to modify action. We're going to set this to true. And we're going to set up a very simple sprinting function. It's not even going to have movement speed or anything. It's just going to be a simple input event. And I'm just going to go keyboard event left shift. So now with keyboard event left shift, what I'm going to do is grab a reference to our parkour system, pull it into our graph, and then we're going to pull off of this and we're going to set sprint, hook the off of pressed, set it to true. We're going to duplicate this setting of sprint and make sure to plug the target in because if this does not have a target, it will not set it correctly. It'll actually give you an error. So just make sure to plug these in correctly. And then off of released, we're going to make sure that that sprinting value is set to false. Now, if we compile and save, now that we've set up our input and we've told the system, hey, we want to use the sprint to modify action. So now that we have that value set to true and the Boolean value that's going to control it, if we go ahead and hit play now, if I go over to, let's say, for example, this object, right, a medium height platform or a medium height platform type object, yep. And if I go in and just press the space bar without pressing shift at all, you can see he does a mantle. However, if I hold shift and then press space, you can see he does the vault over. And now the theory behind this, just so you guys understand like my thought process with this, is that there's certain actions that are going to have a little bit of an increase of velocity carry. So for example, if we're not sprinting, right, so normally you would have a different animation playing and you would have increase of movement speed. So when you're doing something like this, right, a vault on top of when you have a carry of momentum can sometimes look a little weird. Almost look like when you do the action, you're killing your momentum. However, if you're using your momentum, you can then kind of carry yourself over the object instead. So that's kind of the theory behind the sprint modifier specifically, is that it's kind of used to be able to select certain actions that are going to kind of use more of a velocity carry, where if you're not pressing sprint, it'll use kind of a lesser velocity carry type of action. And just to give you more examples beyond just the vault and mantle style. If we go to the action modifications here, under the sprint and the default actions, the low height platform is going to be a jump over with sprinting true onto a false. The gap action free fall is going to be if you're the flourish jump or the jump off ledge into falling. That's going to be if sprinting is true, drop to falling if it's false. It's basically two different types of actions where you'll go a little closer to the ledge, maybe kind of like use it to fall off, or you're just going to do a straight like sort of like front flip or something off the actual object. Same thing with, the climb up vault action, whether it's going to be a standard if you are pressing the sprint key. If you're not pressing the sprint key, it'll vault to the other side if it's able to. So like there's certain actions that like it's just kind of like looking at whether or not there would be a velocity carry. And then the simple value is what controls that switch. So now the last thing that we're going to do is set up the slide modifier. Now I will say there's a few different ways that we can set this up. So I'll try to go through all of these options as quickly as I can, but in as much detail. So the first thing we should probably do though is get our animations. So we're going to minimize this, go into our content browser, and I'm going to do my usual prototype animation thing here. I'm going to find my folder, get my slide animation folder, and I'm going to grab the finish and start of the slide here, and I'm just going to move it into the animations folder and copy. And then just make sure that they're both selected, right click, replace the skeleton to my retarget skeleton, which is my player skeleton, and then right click again, asset actions, and bulk edit via property matrix. Now essentially this is just the way that I prototype animations. I kind of assign everything to the UE4 skeleton, then use the UE4 skeleton as my base, and this way I can test a bunch of different things. But you don't have to do it this way. You can use retargeting methods or whatever you're using. It's just kind of like just showing you my process, that's all. However, just to go really quickly cover what this is though. Now I will say if you're using a different version of Unreal Engine, I think Unreal Engine 5.4, it's just edit via matrix or bulk edit or something like that. But essentially what this allows you to be able to do is edit multiple animation sequences at once. So I can set this one to root motion and this one to not, or I can go over to this menu on the side here, go to the root motion section, and just set it root motion to true on this little checkbox. And then if I do that, all the animations that are inside of this list will now have root motion. You can also do this with additive settings and animation and compression, a whole bunch of stuff. You can edit multiple animations at once, and this is a great tool to utilize for bulk animation editing. But with those now having root motion, what I'm going to do now is we need to make the montage. Now, unlike the other actions that we've done so far, we can't just right-click and create because the overall action is split into two different pieces. So to be able to actually get this into one piece, what we need to do is right-click, go to animation, and then click on montage. And then click on our skeleton here, and we'll just call this slide. And then double click and open it up. Now I'm just going to move the window here so I can make it a little bit smaller. This way I can see my content browser here. And we're going to grab the slide start and drag it over in the default section here so we can add that. And then the slide finish, add that. And boom, now we have both of our slide start and finish into one nice montage. So now that we have our slide montage here, let's go ahead and go back to our player character. Let's start talking about what the slide modifier is and how it works. So sliding itself as an action can be performed in a variety of ways. If we go into the dynamic parkour trace system here, and we look at underground action settings and look at the miscellaneous actions, allowed miscellaneous actions, you'll see slide right here. Now, this is because there's two different versions of sliding. The version that you're going to select inside of here is going to be a controlled slide. Now, areas that you can slide in can be defined through a dimensions section here under the slide area dimensions options. So you'll see that there's a height min max, so the minimum height for you to be able to slide in, and the maximum. You can set the maximum of these to a lot higher if you want to be able to slide into kind of anywhere, but these are just set to values that allow it to be like, if it's beyond this, you really don't need to slide under. Maybe the width you could increase a little bit, but this was just a default value I used for testing. So essentially, whenever the system is able to determine that the minimum width or the width of the area that it finds is within these settings, it will allow a slide. But this isn't the only way to trigger a slide. So there's also a way to be able to trigger it, and this is where the slide modifier also plays into effect here as well. So we're going to need to create a new input really quickly, which we can do this really quickly by taking the left shift, highlighting it, and Control D to duplicate it, highlight the duplicate, click on up in the details panel, the little input key, and then we're going to change this from left shift to C. Now, we also want to get kind of a blocker for input, so this way we don't accidentally trigger it under improper conditions. So if we go up to our jump input here, we have this nice element here, but we don't need all of this. We don't need actually specifically this top part here. We just need this and Boolean connection section. So if we highlight this, Control C to copy it, go over back to our keyboard C input event here, and then if we just Control V, we can then go ahead and get this out of branch, off of pressed, and hook up the condition, and there we go. So now we can make sure that we're not doing a slide when we're not, actually on the ground and not in a climbing state. However, if this is true, what we're going to do is grab a reference to the dynamic parkour trace system, pull off, and we're going to execute slide function right here, just like this. Now you'll see that there's a Boolean value and a montage section here. So for right now, we're going to select the Boolean value to true, and we're going to add that slide montage that we just made into this. Now what the free slide is basically the equivalence of utilizing a play montage node off of keyboard event C. It's really no different. However, the reason why I added this in is because it allows you to be able to switch between using the free slide or using the controlled slide during runtime if you would like. So it's kind of like you can use it one way, you can use it the other, or you can just dynamically swap the Boolean value when the input happens. So just to show you really quickly, I'm going to go compile and save. Now one thing I want to note is that I do not have slide allowed on my actions list here. However, I do have the use free slide selected and a slide montage put in here. So I just want to note that that is currently the setup. Now if I go and I press C, you'll notice that slide does happen. The reason why is because if you add this function and use the free slide, then ultimately you're putting the effort in to allow sliding. So that's the reason why that if you want to just use the play montage node equivalent, then you can just go ahead and add this in. But it's not going to be blocked just because of the fact that you didn't allow this action, because if you're not using slide, you're not going to be using this function. So that's ultimately the thought process behind that. However, if you wanted to use the controlled slide, you would just need to uncheck this Boolean value, and then we're going to go to the interfaces, action events, and we're going to look at under miscellaneous action. Now we'll take this and we'll just move it over to where the rest of our action events are, and we're just going to box select the play montage and mesh, Control D to duplicate. This way we don't have to kind of reset it up. Plug in those executions there, pull off of the play montage, and we're just going to type in select to get a nice select node here. Now the miscellaneous action type here, the little enum, we're just going to plug into the index to get this nice list. And then under slide, we're going to go ahead and just put our slide animation in there, just like so. And we'll compile and save. Now, as I had said before, this is going to be a sort of a calculated slide event. It's not just going to allow you to do it if the input is pressed. It's going to check and make sure the conditions have been met. So as a result, we need to make sure that because it's running through the rest of the system, that this slide montage here has the end parkour action event. Now, we want to make sure to put that right about here, I would say. And we're going to go into the notifies, add notify, and then reset parkour action just like that. And now if we go back to the character blueprint here, and then go into the dynamic parkour trace system, and then what we're going to do is just make sure under miscellaneous actions, allowed miscellaneous actions, slide is set to true. And then we'll compile and save, and then we're going to make a little slide area for our character to actually go into. So I'm just going to take these and we'll move them back just a little bit to kind of get them out of the way. And then we'll take this guy and we'll duplicate it, move it forward so that way it's lined up. Move it over something like this, and then kind of just rotate this 90 degrees, just to kind of a quick line up here. All right, so that should be good. And then we'll just go ahead and move it up so that way it's better aligned with the area. Something like that should be within reason. I'll maybe make the area a little bit smaller. It's all about just kind of playing around and seeing what looks good for you. I think that might actually be a little too big. I don't want to make it overly large. So we'll see how that looks. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Now, the thing to remember when setting up things like this, like when you're doing your level design stuff for like a slide area, for example, is that if we pull up the character blueprint here and we look at the under the miscellaneous actions slide area dimension options, you're going to notice that there's values here that are like 60, 180, 60, 250. So essentially what these represent are standard units in Unreal Engine. So 60 units would be a little over half a meter because it's 100 units for every 1 meter inside of Unreal Engine unit system. So this would be about a little over half a meter. This would be a little under 2 meters. This would be a little over half a meter. This would be about 2.5 meters. So when you're doing your actual level design and all your stuff like that, you can use these to be able to reference in a normal context. But so now what we can do is we go and hit play. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to go back to the montage here. And I'm going to remove this out of here. Even though we got free slide unchecked, I just want to make sure to remove this out of here as well. You don't need to do this. I'm just showing you that it's still going to trigger the montage, even though it's not in the other one anymore. You can see that now it's using this option instead. And we're getting some some sphere traces that are being triggered and some other elements. So we've got some nice things that are being added. However, there is one thing that I do recommend. As you notice, there's the warp point for warp 1 is kind of right there in the middle, just before the kind of center of the overall opening. What this can be used for, if we open up the slide montage, add a notify track here, and then at the bottom, add a notify state and add a motion warp window, and we'll look at right when he gets to it, like a full downward state, something like that, and then we'll align it to that position. Something like this. And then we'll kind of give him a little bit of a longer window to go in there, go into the root motion modifier, and then we'll name this to warp 1. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because this way we can make sure the character is fully down by the time he reaches the actual opening of the area, so he's not still going down if you're closer to the object. Now, we are going to want to make sure to keep ignore z-axis checked and warp rotation checked. So the only thing we're doing is just naming it. This is one of those rare occurrences where we're just going to keep all the default options and we're just going to name it so it knows the location. And now if we go ahead and minimize and we hit play again, now when we press the slide key, you can see that it goes under a little bit before, and had my guy a little bit more aligned to the wall. But yeah, so you can see that he's doing the slide and he's sliding under and he's kind of going under a little bit before, making sure that he's actually at that proper point. Now, if you want to be able to set it up so that way it uses free slide and the actual targeted slide, you can use this Boolean value right here, and you can just pull off of it, promote to a variable, and set your own conditions however you want. Right now, there is nothing in the system that dynamically selects between the two. However, there is an intended feature, hopefully, that I'll be able to add in before too long. I am working on it, I just haven't quite ironed out how it is that's going to be the best approach. So, but now that we got our slide in place, before we start talking about the modifier and how all that works, I do want to note one last thing though. If you do want to use the free slide and the regular together, you will need to make sure to have 2 slide montages. And the reason why is that the free slide does not need to have the notification, nor does it need the motion warping window. So on the duplicate, we're going to take both of these off and make sure to put this into the actual free slide montage area. Because if you don't, you're actually going to see that there's weird movements and behaviors that are going to occur when you trigger this action. So we're going to go ahead and close this down, and now we're going to talk about the slide modifier itself and the way that it works. So we're going to open up the dynamic parkour trace system here, and we're going to take a look at under the action modification settings and and then slide modifier. Now, the way that this ultimately works by default is you can see here, default action choice is either down or up/across. Now this is going to influence things like dropping from a ledge, jumping across instead of dropping down, vaulting over or onto something rather than under if there is an available slide area. So this is where it's going to kind of choose, if you're not using the slide function, which we're going to kind of cover here in a moment, but if you're not using this, it's going to choose a default. So for example, if I change the default action choice to up/across, but I have slide enabled, and we've also confirmed that this is within the available slide area, but if I go ahead and I press the space bar, you can see he's going to go up and over. Doesn't matter what I do, and if I go ahead and go, instead of up and across, I hit down, and if I go up and I hit the space bar, now you can see he does the slide. Now, the thing about this is that the action selection of up, across, or down is just going to be a default. However, if you go up and across and you block the area, so if I duplicate this really quickly and I just add kind of this and make it a little longer, kind of like a roof section, essentially, and then I go hit play, and then I go ahead and hit the space bar, you can see he chooses the slide under. Even though up/across was taken, because this is a blocked section, it chooses slide instead. So there's a lot of conditions under which you can make sure that slide does occur. I just want to point out that if you're not using the modifier, this is going to be the behavior that you can currently expect within the system. Now, however, if we are looking to use the modifier, all we need to really do at this point is select this little checkbox, and we're going to uncheck the use free slide, compile, and save. And now if we go ahead and we hit play, actually we're going to remove that really quickly, and we're going to go ahead and if I press C, we're going to go and slide under. However, if I press the space bar, we're going to go ahead and jump over. So this is where that dynamic input option really kind of starts to come into play, where we're going to select different actions. So if I go ahead and I move, let's say, for example, this back here, just to show you what the two modifiers together, because right now we can jump, or we can do traversal actions off of the jump input. We can vault over things, or we can slide under them if the space is available, depending on if we're pressing the C key or space bar. And then we can also mantle on top of things, or if we're pressing sprint, vault over them. So this is kind of a base rundown of kind of what the overall elements for the modifications do, is that it allows you to be able to dynamically select a lot of different actions based off of just a few key input types. Like if you're pressing C, which is, the base input for either down or crouch or something like that. If we're pressing spacebar, which is generally up or jump. Kind of using that dynamic but still familiar type of input system. And you can define it all right here within the system. And if you guys ever get confused on what elements get controlled by which modifier, you can always look at the list. But if you want a more detailed version of it, inside of the documentation, there is an entire graph that I've created for what modifier controls what action and the conditions under which it gets controlled. So I just want to point that out, that there is something that does exist in the documentation to help with that if you ever get confused. But that's kind of really it, guys. You can use the free slide, you can use the control slide, and just to also show you here, if I, let's say, for example, move this in and make this a super small area, and I use the free slide off, if I press the play button here, it will not allow me to be able to do the under action. It's actually going to do the over action instead, even though I press C. Now, if I open this back up a little bit, press play again, and then I press C this time, you can see that he goes under. So it's getting that calculation directly based off of the space that's available here of the object. So that's really going to close it out for today's video, guys. That's kind of the main modifiers and setting them up and getting them in place. The next video, we're going to be talking about getting the tic-tac action set up. So I hope you guys are excited. I know I am. If you guys have any questions, concerns, or comments, always available in the Discord, or you can comment on the video here today. But hope to see you in the next video. But until then, stay tuned, and as always, stay animated.